Thanks for joining us again, and welcome to the Help, I'm a Camera Nerd podcast. I'm your host, Films by AW, aka Anderson West, and
I am also your host. Hope I'm a nerd.
we're thankful that you join us again today. This is our second episode 0002, because we intend to do this thousands of times. So, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining, and we're happy to have you. You can find us on our YouTube channel, which is my YouTube channel is Films by AW, and Mark's is Help, I'm a Nerd. Sorry, guys.
Help, I'm a Nerd.
And you can find us on Spotify, and wherever you get your podcasts on Help, I'm a Camera Nerd. So, yeah, we're going to get straight into it. And Mark, last time we were discussing, you just bought your Red Scarlet. This is around 20. Well, you got your Red Scarlet. We were experimenting with it, and you felt still limited in what you could do. And, what was the next part of your journey?
So it wasn't so much, it wasn't the camera limiting me. It was that the camera was limiting the work I could do because of obviously only shooting RAW. And it was, a lot of the work I was doing wasn't calling for that. So I kind of felt like I had this great camera, but there were a lot of jobs that I just couldn't use it on. And I think that was my main camera. I maybe had like a B cam that was like a 5D Mark II at the time. But yeah, I remember we shot your short film, Diembe. And at that point that we shot that film, what year was that? 2012 was that? 2014?
No, that was 2015, March 2015.
Yeah. So I remember on that shoot, the Ursa was announced. And that was, the Ursa Mini was announced. So the Blackmagic already had a couple of cameras out at that point, I think. They had the big Ursa, and they had like a...
That thing was massive.
Yeah, it was gigantic. Massive. And I was considering that. And then there was, I think, there was a couple of smaller ones, like the really early days. I'm not sure if was the original 4K out back then. I remember, the really tiny Pocket was out, I think, the really small one. There was a couple of ones, but yeah, they announced the Ursa Mini, and, on paper it sounded amazing, but obviously Blackmagic had a bit of a rough start, especially with the bigger Ursa, that I think it was like, it was really heavy. And a lot of people, it had giant monitors on, which was great. So you didn't need to rig a bunch of stuff up, but it was probably, it was probably heavier than rigging up just a camera. So I was considering that, but the Ursa Mini was just like on paper, just a way better camera. And I remember talking to you at the time and like talking about selling the Red, and obviously Red is Red. Everyone loves Red. So it's like, is that a good idea to sell the Red and move over to a camera that's not even been released yet? And there's a few test clips out, and that is it. And I took a chance, I took a big risk, because the camera wasn't coming out for a while, and I think it even got delayed as well. So I sold my Red in advance of the camera coming out, probably like 6 months in advance of the camera coming out. So I left myself without a cinema camera. I still had my 5D, I think, Mark II, but I didn't have a cinema camera, and I was just waiting. I paid for it, was just waiting for this Ursa Mini to arrive. And I remember having a lot of projects coming up, and I was really dying to get my hands on this camera. I even reached out to Blackmagic and was like, can you send me one early just so I can use it? But yeah, they couldn't. But yeah, it was a big risk. And when did it really come out? I feel like I should probably talk about film school a little bit, because it was around that time I had gone to film school.
Yeah. Because I think, that was an interesting point. I remember you telling me you're selling your Red, and I was like, I had heard of Blackmagic, and I was like, are you sure, bro? I mean, the Red is, like you said, the Red was the Red, and we're talking, this is 2015, 2016, and obviously, Red, it was either Red or Alexa. I think obviously the Sonys had come out, but it was still, the brand name of Red was still quite popular, and the Scarlet was still an in-demand camera. But again, I know you at the time, you were doing work that, I'd be hiring him when we were working. I was working at Fuzzy as the DP in a job, and and be shooting commercials. We shot a few commercials on the Scarlet, didn't we?
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
some
we did.
idents for United Utilities. Shout out. We're still, they still hold up well.
Yeah, I mean, all the footage from the Red still holds up well. Even today, I still have, you shot one of like my first big film on the Red, I think, and it was a film called Falling, and we shot it in London. I think it was on an old BBC building rooftop, which I never paid for in the end, but they'll never find out. But they didn't ask to be paid.
Well, now they find out.
So yeah, and I still have all the raw footage from that, or the project managed version of it, and it still looks like stunning today. There's nothing wrong with that footage. I would never look at that footage and assume that was from an old camera. So yeah, I mean, it was a great camera. It still is probably a great camera, to be fair. So yeah, definitely the footage and stuff held up.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it does still hold up, doesn't it? And obviously it's a really good. It was a really good sensor. I know, obviously, we discussed about the low light wasn't great, but back then we weren't really looking for that. People just light a scene. But
yeah,
so yeah, I mean, what about the Ursa Mini? Sorry, Ursa Mini.
Mm-hmm.
What was it about that camera that really stood out to you? That was like, okay, let me take the jump and sell a Red, and get this.
So it did multiple formats. I think you could shoot ProRes, and at the time it did DNG RAW. I think it was DNG, right? That's what it was. But I was interested in ProRes because I had been using the Alexa, and Alexa shoots ProRes, and it was more than sufficient for the projects that I was using. I mean, ProRes 422HQ is obviously, great format to shoot in. And I wasn't really too fussed about the RAW because obviously my experience of RAW up to that point had kind of been, I wasn't really needing to use it. But it did still have RAW if I needed it. So it appealed to me for that. I think it had more frame rates. It was smaller. It had a flip-out monitor built into it. The battery mount V-Lock, I mean, the Scarlett was V-Lock, but it took less power, because the Scarlett was power hungry. It would drain those V-Locks quickly. And yeah, and it was just an all-round smaller, like everything built-in camera. You weren't going to need to be rigging up too much stuff. And it was just a really appealing camera. It was still a big camera that you could, rig up, use on cinema shoots, interchangeable mounts that were way less expensive. Actually, no, it didn't have interchangeable mounts. The first one had a locked mount. The second one, the Ursa Mini Pro, was it called? Yeah,
so you got the Ursa Mini, and then you got the Ursa Mini
I got the
Pro.
original Ursa Mini. Yeah, yes. And I used that for however long it was out, and then it's almost like they immediately realized all the things that they could include into this to make the camera better. Like NDs, built-in NDs, interchangeable mounts.
Yes.
More buttons and switches for you to change settings without having to touch the touch screen. So that it's like in a very short amount of time, they listen to the community. Because, I mean, the great thing about Blackmagic is it's got a really good community of people, and really talented people as well that, can feed back on the camera. And that's one of the great things about Blackmagic is they will listen to the community and they will try their best to implement features that people are asking for, even in firmware updates. I mean, more cameras do that now, but, one of the great things about Blackmagic is through firmware updates, you've got a lot of stuff. They brought in an entirely new RAW codec through a firmware update.
Yeah.
That's it's pretty cool, right? So, yeah, I mean, the first camera, I remember getting it the first day it arrived, and I kind of took it out of the box and I was using it, and I didn't know if I'd made the right decision. I remember the LUT that comes on the camera was very, very contrasty. It made the footage, it didn't make the footage look as nice as the footage could look. But obviously you can play around with LUTs, you can find different LUTs. Again, the community you know, and Blackmagic being a grading, like having a grading software and stuff that kind of is implemented, meant that you could change that stuff. And it was just a learning curve. I mean, every camera is a learning curve, right? You get it, and then you figure out all the things you can do to make the camera better. So, yeah, I can't remember the first job I used it on. I think it was a shoot with Samari, and it was a very small shoot. We didn't have much light and stuff, so I wasn't really getting the best out of the camera. But it was still nice footage, and I was like, yeah, I can see potential here. I can see that if we take the time and use this properly, then I think we can get some good results. And yeah, I'd gone to film school, and I think 2014, I'd applied to London Film School, and I applied never intending to go. I applied hoping that they would accept me, so I would feel a bit better about myself, and be like, oh, I could have gone to film school, because it was a very expensive school, and there was no way that I could afford those fees. But luckily, I ended up getting a bursary that paid, most of the fees, and I went to film school. So there was a lot of shoots that I was able to then, take that camera and use it on. And, they had relatively decent budgets for a short film, some of them. And it was just a great way to kind of put the camera through its paces. And what was the first shoot that we did with the Ursa Mini? Do you remember?
So I think so just remembering when you got it, there was a period where I was skeptical. Like, I know you were like, oh, it's fine, and I was like, oh no, the F5, we'll use the F5, because I kind of looked at them as the same thing. And then we shot, and I don't know if this was the Mini or this is the Ursa Mini, the Mini Pro or the Mini, but then we had shot a film for a museum, a pop-up museum that was doing a film about Roman cavalry men. And so we were shooting that on Red Epic Dragon, and then also the Ursa Mini. It was just something we tried. In hindsight, it was like a bit, just use one of the systems. But I think, you just, I was familiar with the Red format. We had a decent budget, so I was like, we'll get it. And obviously we'll bring Mark on as the DP, the DP. But then you saw second camera. We had a weird arrangement.
Yeah.
I won't go into why, but we did. But I remember, obviously, the Red Jam, we got some beautiful stuff. And obviously we're using Zeiss Ultra Primes. So it's like, well, obviously it's very good. Or was it Ari Ultra Prime? We're using Ultra Primes.
I think it was Zeiss. Lovely. I don't think they were Ari. I think they were Zeiss Super Primes. Yeah. They
were lovely lenses. Got some great stuff. And then I remember the Blackmagic stuff the colors were different, but it was like, this is pretty good.
Yeah, in hindsight, I had used a terrible filter on a fader ND, a cheap fader ND. And obviously one of the limitations of that camera with the NDs was the IR pollution. So I think a lot of the times my combination of my cheap filter made a lot of the footage look washed out, as opposed to the red footage, which was a lot more contrasty. But also 4 times the price, 5 times the price.
Well,
which was the
more
Red
than
Epic
5
Dragon.
times. Because this is I think where we started having discussions about, okay, because obviously you were at film school and you had an access to an Alexa at London Film
Alexa
School. I think
Classic,
they had an accent. Yeah. So, and what was curious is you were still using your Blackmagic even when the opportunity to use Alexa was there. Obviously because you had your camera and you're more familiar with it. Or am I wrong in that? Explain a little bit of that process.
I would say that we used the Blackmagic when the budget wasn't there for the Alexa a lot of the time. Most people at film school were leaning towards Alexa, but that's because we had used Alexa and they knew what they were getting. The Blackmagic actually shot in a much higher resolution, and the Blackmagic shot in a much higher resolution, and the footage at the time didn't quite match, but it was a great camera. I shot, can't remember how many, but I went to Finland and we shot on the the Blackmagic and the footage looked great. But we did, yeah, I think people would lean
Did you go to
towards
Ghana
the
with
Alexa.
it as well? Did you take it to Ghana?
No, I didn't have it by then. So I didn't have it for my grad film either. I was desperate to get it. I would have used it on my grad film, absolutely. And I'm convinced the film would have looked just as great as the Alexa Mini. But at the time, I didn't have the camera to use it. But I would have done probably. I probably would have done. So yeah, it was one of these things where, you know, people would definitely lean towards Alexa, and probably rightly so. I'm not saying that the Blackmagic is like going to replace the Alexa. The Alexa is a fantastic, reliable, robust camera, right? You know what you're getting. It's industry standard. So I think that's a safety net for a lot of people. They would just lean towards what they knew rather than taking a chance on something. And that's always the way, I think, still today. You know, most people will lean towards like the Netflix camera list. You know, a lot of people probably look at that and think, oh, well, they're the only good cameras because Netflix has determined that. And it's rubbish. It's absolute
and like
rubbish.
I told you last episode, there was a rumor of ex-Red employees working at Netflix.
Yeah.
That helped them. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, because is the Ursa on that list? The Ursa Mini?
It is now the Ursa Mini G2.
Yeah.
And now the Ursa 12K OPLF. Something about the optical lens patch filter being in that 12K. Something about reducing moire. But, you know, the Ursa Mini 12K has been used on fairly big feature films. I think like I was reading a featurette about the film Rise on Disney Plus about Giannis Antetokounmpo, the NBA player. And they shot it with they had it on 12 on a 12K. And that film looks good, you know. But yeah, sorry, I don't want to interject and cut like you were saying. But I think, you know, the price. Let's go back to the price because I think this is when we started having discussions. And yes, the colors were different, you know, and obviously we've gone into why that was on that particular project. But the thing that really stood out, I was like, how much does this thing cost?
Yeah.
And remember,
how much
context, at the time, Epic Dragon was a 30,000 pound camera.
Yeah.
You hire it for £400 a day.
Scarlett was a £15,000 camera at the time, right?
Yes.
So yeah, and I think the Ursa Mini came out, the first one, it was about $4 and a bit grand for the very first one, I think, which is crazy. That's crazy. That's like twice the price of a 5D Mark II, and for a cinema camera, like that was one of the big drawing points. Like that was one of the big pulls for me, was how cheap the camera was. And obviously I didn't want to buy just the cheapest camera, but it would allow me to then go off and buy other things that would be a benefit to me with the extra money that I had left over from my Red, like lenses and stuff like that. So it was a real, you know, and the opportunity, like the prospect of using this camera on more jobs as well, was obviously a huge pull for me. Yeah. So yeah, you almost, I think that to be honest, it does them more damage than good. Because when you price something so low, there's that whole thing, right, about MKHD he talked about it, and it was like, you know, the pricing structure of things. You price one really expensive, one really low, and one in the middle, and it dictates where most people will kind of go. So, and I think a lot of camera manufacturers do that, you know, they'll have the good one, the better one, and the budget one. And Blackmagic at the time, their best one was way cheaper than the budget one of the next thing, and it had all of the features. Basically, it was like it had the dynamic range, right? So I didn't see the trade-off. I didn't understand. It seemed too good to be true, and I was like, you know what, I'm going to give this a go.
Yeah, you know, here's the other thing about that. So I'll bring up my perspective as a director. Obviously, you're a director too, Mark, director DP. But as a director, self-shooting director, and director producer, I think when I start having these discussions with you, because you hear that, and obviously everyone knows about the original Blackmagic first cinema camera, and it's this weird triangle thing, and there was loads of memes about it because the people looked at it ergonomically and thought, that looks silly, that can't possibly be useful. And I think that tainted a lot of the views of people. And again, it being so cheap, you're 100% correct. It was just, I was skeptical about using it on decent budget jobs. And I'd always suggest, oh no, we'll shoot on the Sony. I know what it's going to do. It's reliable. It's not glitchy, even though at no point as a Blackmagic Ursa glitched on us. And I think it was that, again, that budget solution did work against them, because you make the same camera and they price it at 10 grand, and they could have done that. They really could have done that. And, you know, it done 4K, internal NDs, I know with the Mini and all this kind of stuff, does ProRes, does a RAW, a harder to deal with RAW, but still RAW.
Yeah.
They could have just priced it at 10 grand and everyone would have still said this was budget.
Yeah.
But they literally priced it as low as they could to be very appealing and to be disruptive, because again, that changed our expectations of what you could do. Because if you looked at, let's look at the time, let's go a little bit forward where we, the Ursa Mini Pro, and it had its NDs, and I think it did 4.6K at the time. And I remember that's when I started to shift and say, okay, you trust this camera. I know a lot about cameras, but I'm not going to keep dictating you the camera you should use, because I think it was a job we were filming London Bridge and a project there. And the footage was really nice. And it was the first time I'd actually used it. And I was like, the menu, you just changed the ISO and that by a slider? Like, no, this is too easy. And obviously at that point, people would always refer to the Alexa and that interface being simple to use. It's industry standard. It doesn't get in the way, because the red,
the
obviously
red,
now
the menu,
the
you
red
know what
was
there
ridiculous.
is? Cinema cameras, it's almost like cinema cameras, some of them come out and they just complicate the menu. And after I used Alexa, the first time I was like, this is weird. This camera feels like the easiest camera I've ever used. Why is that? And you're like, of course it is. It should be easy. Like, people don't want to use something that's complicated. Not when you're you're trying to get stuff done quickly. And Blackmagic, they took a lot of great things from the Alexa and the menu design. You have to kind of applaud Blackmagic, because their menus are easy to follow. They're not complicated. I mean, Red has got better, definitely, with time, like the Komodo, but it's still packed, And people would be like, well, more features, so you need more menus and stuff. But there's still something to be said about layout and how you navigate those menus. And I think Blackmagic are great with their menu and like structure and where you go to. And a lot of people would use that camera and they'd be like, why is it's so easy? Like, what's the catch? Why is it?
It's like, have I done something wrong? Yeah.
And
sorry.
It's great.
Just think about it. It's just, you touch the screen, you slide to change your ISO. You don't feel like you need to go like do a special initiation to the camera, officials that you're going to do this and do this. And obviously I had camera training for a while, and knew the red was knew my way around the red. It was a little complicated, but you got it. Obviously, the time-based story that I've shared with you a million times about you shooting a music video, and I thought the camera was broken because and so they had to order a new one in, and then I realized, oh no, it's the time-based. Is this the project setting, and then you could do your frame rates from there. And I didn't realize that, and
no, because
get a second camera in and whatever.
Yeah, we'd use DSLRs, and DSLRs rarely will slow your footage down, so they will just give you the frame rate. They won't give you the project frame rate, and you have to slow it down. Whereas cinema cameras, most of them will slow it down according to what your project is. But I remember as well, like I remember the job now. I remember the job that we did, that was like probably the first thing I'd done where I felt like the camera had really excelled, and that was the adverts for University of Sussex.
Yes,
and that was that was before I'd got the Pro, some of those, and we'd shot some footage, and we'd used, the budget was there to get in those lenses, those really great lenses,
super speeds,
cinema lenses, I think we also used the Cooks at one time, maybe. I'm not sure, maybe, but yeah, it was, and we just got really stunning footage. It was like, there was a lot of things that went into that. We were shooting in Brighton at the summer, perfect weather. Rarely happens that you get the most perfect weather. There's like, we were filming certain members of the public and everyone was happy because it was hot. And it was just, the camera was just like blowing me away with how stunning the footage was coming out of it. And, that was before the Pro came out. And the only issue that I'd noticed is, again, with the filters, and using filters on that camera and the IR pollution basically turned, if you had like black jeans on, they would be red in the footage. You can grade that out, but it's not ideal. And then obviously when they brought the Pro out, they built in IR&Ds. So that, I'm not sure whether it eliminated it entirely, but it definitely reduced it massively. Again, listening to the community, listening to what the community are asking for and stuff. So it was like, that job was a big deal.
Well, at the time, you got to remember, Earl, as well, that wasn't the only camera that had IR pollution. The Reds were really bad.
Yeah.
They were terrible for IR pollutions. I remember hiring NDs for a commercial, and the guys from Provision, shout out Provision Manchester, the best kit house in the country. They were like, look, you can get IR&Ds. And at that point, I didn't really get the concept of IR pollution. He was like, look, it cuts the Reds out. I'm like, we can grade it out. It's fine. Because it was like trying to save like £100 in the budget, right? And then we got the NDs. We're shooting on, whatever they had. And then the footage, you put more NDs on it, was just like, it just had this slightly red cast or pinkish cast on it. And you could grade it out, and we did. But even it was still a little bit. And again, this is a Red Scarlet or Red Dragon. It still had that. And so after that point, I just hired IR&Ds to be safe. Just pay the extra £100 a day for the whole set of them, because it was it eliminated that. So it wasn't just a Blackmagic problem. It was cameras at that time. I think they rectified it with the Epic and the different OPLFs you can put in.
Yeah.
Because they could do that. But like the internal NDs of these cameras, they were all IR, because the Sonys, we never had that red cast problem. But the problems with it, but not that.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I'm gonna move on to the Pro came out, and I upgraded to the Pro, sold the original. And the Pro was, the footage all looked the same sensor. You got higher resolution, and I used that camera for a good few years and shot some really stunning stuff on it. I shot a music video in Iceland, just all natural lighting. Some of probably the most beautiful footage I've shot, and I think I had that for a good few years, and it felt like I was in London at the time, and it, there was after film school had finished and everyone had kind of gone off on their separate ways, I was still doing the bigger, more cinematic stuff from time to time, but not as much.
Yeah.
And I was getting, more single shoots. In London, you don't really want to drive. In London, you will get a fine for no reason. So I was getting a lot of work where I was a single shooter. And the problem with the Ursa was that it was just too big for me to be carrying around London, along with the other stuff that I had to carry. So, and I think this was probably a mistake in some ways, but beneficial, because the camera is amazing. I switched to the Pocket 6K, and I sold my Ursa. And that was kind of, that was, again, just going towards the work, going towards what I was doing mostly. And that camera seemed almost too good to be true again, because it was like, offering a very similar looking footage to the Ursa Pro, but it was a tiny camera that was like, that you could carry and fit in a bag with all the other stuff that you wanted. And again, I took the risk. I pre-ordered, and I bought the camera, and again, it just kind of blew me away how good this little tiny camera was. I mean, I'm not going to say it was as good as the Ursa Pro, because it wasn't, but it was really, really good. Like, it was for the stuff I was doing, I was like, from now on, I'm just going to rent for the bigger projects and I'll use this for all the other stuff that I'm doing. And I ended up using it on so much stuff, even like, you know, if I was doing a short, it was more than good enough for the stuff I was doing. And like, I don't think many people would tell. And I've used that camera many times as a B camera for the Alexa without anyone ever noticing the footage. So yeah, and that's the time I remember going on a job with you where it was just a live conference thing, but it was one of the first times I'd brought my, and you were skeptical. You were like, oh, you saw this camera, you bought this little tiny thing here. It's not going to be good enough. And I was like, honestly, man, I like, check it out. Go and take it around and have get some shots on it, see what you think. And what did you think?
So let me go a bit back further with that one, because at that point, I wanted my own camera. I wanted to do my own stuff on the side, you know, my little bits and bobs. And obviously, I didn't want to, because the company I worked for had a cinema camera. I didn't want to spend $4 or $5 grand on my own cinema camera when full time I'm working for a production company that has one. So I wanted something that was, you know, I could use for some photos and some smaller shoots. And so I bought a Sony A7R, not an S, because I wanted to still take some stills, because at the time I was thinking doing more photography business, whatever. And the thing about the Sony A7R II, you know, great stills camera, but the video at that time, the mirrorless stuff was good. And obviously the A7S, I think, would have been a bit better for video. But it just, compared to the Cine Alta line, so obviously the FS7, which I still despise to this day, but the F5, it just lacked the sharpness, because at that point they weren't, the mirrorless sensors were behind the cinema sensors, and rightly so, right? Because, you know, you're talking about cameras like cost 5 times more. But at the time, that's what I wanted. But then I never wanted to shoot a film on it. It was just, do a little documentary here. And at the time, you could put like on the hot shoe mount, I think an amount for it to put XLRs in. So I do small little documentaries here and there, little jobs. But it was kind of fandangly, but you know, really good stills camera. Really enjoyed it. You know, I debate sometimes whether I should rebuy it just for stills, but that's another story. But again, the issue I had was the F5. You know, it was quite a big case the company had it in. So it's like, if I'm just gonna take it out this weekend just to try some bits, it's quite a hassle to bring it, because you know it's gonna fit in the boot. The other kit I'm gonna bring it in, and it's not a pick up and go and shoot camera, which is what I think you want from a camera when you're just experimenting. You just want to try some things out. But the image on the A7R II was just never, it just was like, it wasn't as sharp. It wasn't as sharp. Obviously, you know, it wasn't built to do optimum video. And so at the time, and this is around 2018, you know, doing my own photos or whatever, you know, I shot like a pitch video for a competition. Shout out the Pitch UK, the best film pitch competition in the UK. And I was shooting some bits. I shot a little trailer when I went on holiday to Malawi, to kind of give this vibe of this, like, you know, this African migration thriller drama. And, you know, we got some decent stuff on that. But again, if I wanted to shoot a short, I just get the F5 and just use that. But I wanted a camera that I felt the image quality would be better and that I could own it. You know, I didn't want to spend 5, 6, 7 grand. I want to spend 2.5. And at the time, the A7S is great for, you know, that stuff. But like, it's not something I'd be happy shooting a short film on, knowing that I have access to an F5. I'd always refer to that. But then obviously the issues I have with the F5 of the size. And so fast forward to 2019, we were on this job, and I heard about the pockets, and again I would mock, because I was like, how's that gonna fit in your pocket? It's massive. And the name, they should have just changed the name. And I remember you brought it, and I read little bits about it. I was like, 6K, that's not a real 6K. I don't know why I thought that. I was just skeptical. I was like, no, it can't possibly be that good. And then
because like, why would they give you 6K, right? Why would they give you 6K when the most expensive camera they did only gave you 4.6K because that doesn't fit the system of the most
No, it
expensive
doesn't.
camera doing all of the
It
best
doesn't.
things. So like, yeah, of course you would expect there to be something wrong with that because every other company doesn't do that, right? So
And yeah. So I'm on a job with you, and we're, getting some shots here and there, and I'm looking at this. I'm thinking like, because we had hired in an FS7, which again I really dislike that camera. Some reasons maybe not logical. I just dislike it. Sorry for the tap there. And then obviously the company F5, and then it had yours. And I remember going around with it, get some shots. I'm like, is it all I have to do? Like, yeah, it's really intuitive. And this is September 2019, that time period. And we got it back into, we got around. I was skeptical. I was like, there's no way the footage looks like how it does on this monitor. It's impossible. It can't look that good. It's $2,000 and it's small. It can't look like that. I get back into post. And at this point, I was already convinced by the Ursa Mini because I was like, it does do as good as the F5. I trusted that. We had used it in quite a few jobs. And it was like, yeah, I like it. Really simple. But there's no way. I'm like, and out of my head, I'm like, why have you done that? Why have you gone to the small camera, bro? Selling yourself as a DV, get the, biggest camera you can get, that's not too much and ungangly, whatever. But when we got back into post, I found myself on the, when you're doing the little montage of people at the conference being happy, didn't use any of the FS7 stuff. Just was like, I just don't like the look of it. And it was because I was comparing it to the Blackmagic stuff. And I was like, I can't believe it looks like this. This little camera has this image and it fits in your head and it's easy to use, doesn't get in your way. And it looks better than the footage on the FS7. And people say, oh, it's about the operator. Look, I've been au fait with the F5 and that system, and I know obviously it was a rental, so I didn't have a chance to put my LUTs on. But we're talking about the basic out-of-the-box settings. It was far superior than a camera image-wise. I know other things the F7 does better. Obviously, the ergonomic, the battery life, reliability, et cetera, et cetera. But when we're talking about image here, as a filmmaker, you're not like, oh man, the ergonomics needs to be perfect. You don't care about that in your short film. You just want it to look as good as possible and to not get in the way.
No,
right?
Yeah. And
it became that. It blew me away, and I could not believe it. Put my Sony A7R for sale, and I joined the Blackmagic camera team, the camera system.
And then something big happened that I don't think was by accident when they released Gen 5 Color Science. Yes. And all of a sudden, the Alexa LUT would just straight up work on the Blackmagic camera and give you really great results. It's almost identical to the Blackmagic LUT, but slightly less contrasty, which I prefer. Just because, I like to see a bit more of what I'm getting, and that, like, I just felt like that again was like giving the community what they wanted. They had made this little camera, and all of their cameras all of a sudden match up to Alexa a lot more than they did previously. So it was like it became, good incentive, and I think that's when I started using it as a B camera on a lot more of the bigger stuff I was doing, because it was like, it might be a hard to reach place, we might be mounting like to something. And like Gen 5 Color Science, again, free update, just changed how you use the camera again. And Blackmagic RAW as well, obviously. I think was that
you haven't
just
even
before?
Spoken about that.
Yeah. When was Blackmagic RAW? Was that around Gen 5 Color Science, or was that
around before? I know when I bought. Sorry, let me just clear this. I know when I bought my 6K, and my 6K came around January 2020, before the big but it had come with Blackmagic RAW. But I read that it was something they had added, I think, in late 2019 through an update,
Yeah.
which is insane. Like this camera raw, the only other camera that was doing internal raw without having to add a fandangle. I know we call it an attachment, and I know the FS7 had a silly XDCA whenever attached that made the camera like way longer. And then obviously the F5, you had to put the R5 or the R7 recorder. You attach that to it that made it way longer. But the things that made the Red so appealing, it did that internally. And I know now because it's patents and things like that. But this, I think, I didn't have it when it was in I hadn't joined the Blackmagic camera system when it was Cinema DNG. But from what I understand, those files were just massive, hard to deal with, a lot of processing power. And then Blackmagic decided, we'll make our own RAW format that works with any computer, watching back footage in 6K real time. And at that point, I'm sorry, I'm getting mad now. I'm getting mad. I'm getting passionate, sorry. And at that time, dealing with the Reds, color science, raw workflow was very difficult it's only up until the last 3 or 4 years, well, 4 or 5, I should say, that it became easier to use red code on all sorts of on R3D and every social computers. What people forget is they were selling specific graphics cards for your Mac to use to edit red raw in real time. But Blackmagic had found a way to make raw work with any computer.
Yeah, and
obviously
still
optimized for
today.
DaVinci.
Well, it still works way better than because now I have the Komodo. Yeah, now I have the Komodo, and trying to play that back, it isn't easy. Whereas my laptop will play Blackmagic RAW back, no problem, 6K, same resolution.
So I think it's important for us to, we're getting excited, but we want to keep these episodes around 40 minutes. So
yes,
we'll round up there, and then we'll leave some meat on the bone for next week.
Yeah. I think I've got the important thing that I want to say about Blackmagic is I am not saying that they are the best cameras out there. Obviously they cost way less than a lot of cameras, but the thing about Blackmagic is they don't charge you what they could charge you for their stuff. It is way lower. And that's the philosophy, right, of Blackmagic, is it's making camera equipment accessible. And also, they're the only company that are giving an industry standard, grading and editing software out for free. For free. That's virtually unheard of. You'll pay a subscription for just about anything these days. They will. I was looking at Shotput Pro, which is an offloading program. It's just to offload footage. £149 for the first year, £60 after that. And I'm not saying they shouldn't charge for their software. You do have to charge for software, because otherwise how do you make money, right? But Blackmagic don't charge a fortune. They keep their prices realistic so that people can afford them. And the DSLRs that all cost, around the same price, more, some of the Sonys, I would still pick a Blackmagic camera to shoot a short film on over a DSLR any day, just because
100%.
It's giving you great footage.
Let me add on to that, because as someone who's, I've owned a 6K, I sold and bought a 6K Pro. 6K Pro is probably my favorite ever camera. They put the filmmaker first, because it's not about the brand name, and it's not about putting a barrier for filmmakers. Listening to Grant Brady talk is quite inspiring. One of our former uni classmates works for Blackmagic now, and you see that passion run through. They believe
Shout out to Chris Javen
in the house. Can you send us a free? Can you send us an Ursa 12K to test?
to test.
Or the box. When that box come out, we love to test it on Help I'm a Camera Nerd. But their philosophy is and you look at the whole throughput of the company, and I do a lot with the live streaming, with my church and other things. They are literally about democratizing the film and media industry, equipment wise. If you have a good idea, you should be able to do it, even if you don't have much money. And I think the philosophy of the pockets, they don't get in the way. They are there to help you. The interface is simple to use. The camera is simple to use. It has NDs. Why can't a small handheld camera have NDs? Oh, it can't because no, they said, yeah, it can. And you can have it for less than $3,000. Why? Because you should. Nothing should get in the way of your ideas. They put XLR, mini XLRs, right? But it's still XLRs on this. It didn't have to do that. There's other manufacturers that just won't even put it almost to a body that's slightly bigger because they're trying to protect their other camera systems. They don't believe in that in protecting their higher end cameras. In their higher end cameras, there'll be things that you need more than the lower end ones. And they're not just gonna be like, oh, we're gonna give this camera so it can only do 4K, even though it could do 6K, and then you'll have to pay the $2,000 for the other model that does 6K and has NDs. It's like, well, no, we'll put NDs in, and it's only 500 pounds more because that's the cost of what it takes to put NDs in. And so I just really appreciate their philosophy throughout the door. I'm a real big fan of them. Obviously, it's just equipment. It's just a tool. But it's a tool that doesn't get in your way. It's a tool that you feel like you can just pop out and shoot a quick short film on it. And you're not looking, and again, and you always say this, and I agree. People are skeptical about, like, oh, you're using a Blackmagic. No one ever complains when they're looking at the footage. Everyone looks at the footage and goes, that's really good. The client doesn't care, and sometimes with the pockets, and because of how we make films and our workflow that we need, sometimes we did shoehorn it in when we should have just hired a slightly bigger camera because, we want to do things like having a video village, remote follow focus, PL mount, and at that point it's like, look, the camera, that's not really what it was meant for. I know a lot of people build them out, add loads of things to the rig, and no problem with that. A lot of really talented filmmakers I know that do that, but that's not really what it was built for. What it was built for was to make you feel as close to your film as possible. Think of it like a director's monitor, a director's eyepiece that you can point wherever you want, and it happens. It doesn't get in the way. That's the way you're looking at it. I use it on a shoot. I actually use it as a director's viewfinder on a shoot with Alexa because actually, and I didn't realize this, the sensor on the 6K and 6K Pro is the exact same size as the Alexa Classic. It's the exact same, not resolution, but in terms of the actual Super 35, it's the exact same size. So again, is that intentional? I think it is. It's the exact same size. So their philosophy, I really appreciate, and I'm a big fan of theirs. Again, it's just a tool at the end of the day. And for me, sometimes I'm on a job and I'll use a bigger camera because it's to impress a client or whatever. But in my head, I know it's like the 6K could do this. There's absolutely nothing stopping. Like that camera could do this, and in some ways look a little better because you have that resolution. But I really think they're a great company. Real big fan of theirs. Yeah. And in further episodes, we're gonna go into how we use them on short films and such. But we're not gonna talk about it today. On other episodes, you got to keep listening.
I think that probably concludes our episode for today, and also the start of our journey to get the Pocket 6K on the Netflix camera approved list.
Yes.
What do you think? I think we can do it. So I think the next one, we're going to be going more into kit. Now we've kind of caught you up to with where we are basically in life. And I think we're going to start focusing on individual film equipment, maybe just talk about, stuff we've used, stuff we've got, stuff that's coming out. And just go in depth, go into it, how you'd really use it. There's all the specs out there, but sometimes how you use kit, that's what gets you that's why you buy it, right? You find that thing that just works for what you want it. I think next time we can talk about the Komodo rig, the beautiful Komodo rig that I'm currently building, that is like very slimline, and I will show you some video of that. It's on my Instagram if you want to check it out before then. But yeah, I think that brings us to the end of this one. So like, subscribe, do all that stuff, and come back again.
Yeah, guys, you know, Help I'm a Nerd. Search for us on Spotify, wherever you get your... Not Help I'm a Nerd. Sorry, let me start that again. So guys, yeah, you wanna... So we'll cut that. So guys, you know, remember to like, subscribe. You know, you can search for our podcast on Spotify or wherever you get your podcast, and that's Help I'm a Camera Nerd. And you can look at it. You can find us on YouTube. Mark is Help I'm a Nerd, and mine is Films by AW. So like, subscribe. Want to see more content from us? You're gonna see more content from us, whether you like it or not. So yeah. That sounds quite threatening. So thanks again for joining, guys, and we'll see you on the other side. Peace out.